Welcome to our deep dive, you guys, into the Fogg behavior model. Um, it's one of those things that can sound a bit academic at first, I think, but I promise by the end of this, you'll be seeing it everywhere in your daily life.
Yeah, it really is. It's a fascinating lens for understanding why we do the things we do and even how, tech companies, marketers, even like your favorite apps are kind of subtly nudging us towards certain actions.
Okay, so we've got a whole stack of articles and research here from Stanford University where this model originated to pieces in Forbes and other publications that kind of explore its real-world impact.
Right. Yeah. So what we'll do is we'll distill all that down so you can walk away with a solid grasp of the model itself and more importantly, how it applies to you.
Okay, so before we get into the nitty-gritty, what's the elevator pitch for the Fogg behavior model? Like, why should anyone care about this?
So in a nutshell, the Fogg behavior model, or FBM for short, it gives us a framework for understanding what it takes for any behavior to happen. And I really do mean any behavior, from, scrolling through social media to finally cleaning out that junk drawer you've been avoiding.
All right, that's a pretty wide range. So how does it work? What are the, magic ingredients for making a behavior happen?
Well, Dr. B.J. Fogg, who developed this model at Stanford, he came up with a beautifully simple formula, which is behavior equals motivation times ability times prompt. And you often see it written as BMA.
BMP, got it.
Mm.
So walk us through what each of those elements means, starting with motivation, I guess. That seems pretty straightforward.
It might seem that way, but motivation is a little more nuanced than most people think. It's not just about willpower, right? Fogg, he identifies three core motivators that drive us: sensation, anticipation, and belonging.
Okay, break those down for me a little bit. What does he mean by sensation?
Okay, so sensation is all about seeking pleasure and avoiding pain. It's tied to those basic instincts we all have, like wanting to feel comfortable or, wanting to eat when we're hungry.
Right, yeah. That makes total sense. We're wired to avoid discomfort. What about anticipation?
Yeah, so anticipation is about being driven by hope or fear with an eye towards the future. So think about why people buy insurance, for example. It's not because they enjoy paying premiums, right? But they're motivated by the fear of something bad happening down the line.
So it's not just about what feels good or bad right now, but also about how we anticipate feeling in the future. What's the third motivator? Belonging.
Yeah, so this one taps into the fact that we're social creatures.
Right.
We're driven by the desire to be accepted and the fear of rejection. This is where things like social influence and trends come into play. Like we do things to fit in, to feel like we belong to a group.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, think about how social media works. We're constantly bombarded with what everyone else is doing, what they're buying, where they're going. It's hard not to be influenced by that.
Exactly. And this is where things get even more interesting. Fogg emphasizes that motivation isn't static. It fluctuates, kind of like a wave. He calls it the motivation wave.
The motivation wave. So are you saying some days we're just more motivated than others?
Exactly. When your motivation is high, you'll tackle those big, challenging tasks. But when it's low, you'll kind of gravitate towards those easier things, the low-hanging fruit. We've all had days where we feel like we can conquer the world, and other days where just getting off the couch feels like a monumental effort.
That is so true. I thought it was just me. So are you saying that we shouldn't rely on motivation alone to get things done?
Well, relying solely on motivation can be a recipe for inconsistency, especially if you're trying to establish new habits. Which brings us to the next element of the Fogg behavior model, which is ability.
Okay. So if motivation is about wanting to do something, ability is about being able to do it. Seems pretty obvious.
It might seem that way, but Fogg's take on ability is a little more nuanced. He says ability isn't just about your skill or knowledge, but it's also about your scarcest resource at any given moment.
Scarcest resource, meaning?
Meaning it could be time, it could be money, physical effort, mental energy, social acceptance even. Whichever of these you're shortest on at that particular time, that will dictate how difficult a behavior is for you, even if you're motivated to do it.
Can you give me an example of how this plays out in real life?
Sure. Imagine you're really motivated to cook a healthy meal after work, but you're also completely exhausted and short on time. In that moment, time and energy are your scarcest resources.
Oh, I've been there. What happens?
So despite your best intentions, you're probably going to order takeout or grab something quick and easy because it requires less of those precious resources that you're low on. Your low ability in that moment overrides your motivation.
Wow, that is so relatable. Okay, so we've got motivation, which can be fickle, and ability, which depends on our resources at any given time. What's the third element?
The prompt. Think of it as the trigger that initiates the behavior. Without a prompt, even with high motivation and ability, The behavior simply won't happen.
So even if I'm motivated to go for a run, and I have the physical ability to do it, if my alarm doesn't go off, no run.
Exactly. That alarm is the prompt that kicks off that whole chain of behaviors that leads to you, lacing up your shoes and heading out the door.
Okay, so prompts are crucial. What are some different types of prompts? Are there different strategies that we can use?
Yeah. Fogg outlines three main types: facilitators, sparks, and signals. Facilitators work best when motivation is high but ability is low. They make the behavior easier to do. So think about easy to follow instructions for a new gadget that you're excited to use, right? The instructions are facilitating your ability to use it, even if you're not that tech savvy.
So it's like they're lowering the barrier to entry when you're eager to get started, but maybe need a little help. What about sparks?
Sparks are most effective when ability is high, but motivation is low. They kind of give you that little nod to get going, like laying out your workout clothes the night before, even though you're not exactly thrilled about exercising in the morning.
Oh, the classic set yourself up for success trick. It's like you're trying to outsmart your own lack of motivation.
Exactly. By making the desired behavior as effortless as possible, you increase the chances of it actually happening. And then we have signals.
What does signals do?
Signals, those work best when both motivation and ability are already high. They just remind you to take action. So imagine you get a notification about a sale on a product that you've been wanting, and you can easily afford. That notification is the signal that triggers you to make the purchase.
So it's like a little don't forget nudge when you're already primed and ready to go.
Precisely. And here's where prompts get even more fascinating. They can actually set off a whole cascade of behaviors, leading to bigger changes than you might expect. One small action can trigger another, and so on.
Like a domino effect.
Exactly. Think about how websites are designed. A lot of them use what Fogg calls hot triggers. These are buttons or links placed strategically to encourage you to take an immediate action. Things like sign up now or get your free trial.
So it's not just about getting you to click that one button, but about starting a whole chain reaction that leads you further down the path they want you to take.
You got it. And that's the power of understanding how prompts work within the Fogg behavior model. You're not just triggering a single action, but potentially a whole sequence of behaviors.
Okay, so now I'm really starting to see how all these elements, motivation, ability, and prompts work together to either create or prevent behaviors. But can you give us some more real-world examples of how this plays out? I'm still trying to wrap my head around it.
Sure, let's start with something simple. Like, have you ever missed a phone call because your phone was on silent, even though you were expecting an important call?
Ugh, yes, all the time.
In that scenario, you had the ability to answer. The phone was right there. And you probably had the motivation, especially if you were anticipating that call. But because the phone was on silent, there was no prompt, so the behavior of answering didn't happen.
The dreaded silent mode fail. Okay, so that's an example of a missing prompt kind of derailing the whole thing. What about a situation where motivation is the key factor?
Think about those incredible stories where someone lifts a car to save a child trapped underneath. The motivation in that situation, saving a life, is so powerful that it can override a lack of ability.
Wow, that's a pretty extreme example, but I see what you mean. The intensity of the motivation can compensate for limitations in ability.
Exactly. What about an example of this playing out in, the tech we use every day? Think about social media notifications. They're like little ninjas expertly designed to, trigger us.
Oh, tell me about it. Those red notification badges are like magnets for my attention.
Right. They tap into our core motivators, things like our desire for belonging or fear of missing out. And they make it incredibly easy to engage, like maximizing our ability to respond.
So basically, they've mastered the art of the Fogg behavior model to keep us hooked.
You could say that. And that's why understanding this model is so valuable. It gives us a peek behind the curtain, so to speak. We start to see how our own behavior is being shaped by design choices and how we can potentially use those same principles to achieve our own goals.
Okay, this is getting really interesting. It's like we're not just mindless consumers anymore, but we can actually become more aware of how these things work and use that knowledge to our advantage.
Exactly. And that's what we'll dig into even further as we continue this deep dive.
I can't wait. This is already making me look at my phone and all my apps in a totally different light.
So you're starting to see how this Fogg behavior model, it's kind of all around us. And now let's talk about how you can actually use it to, make positive changes in your own life.
Yes, let's get practical here. It's one thing to understand how companies are using this, but how can we as individuals use this to actually, achieve our goals and break bad habits?
Well, remember how we talked about motivation being like a wave? It's unpredictable. So Fogg suggests focusing on what you can control, which is your ability, and the prompts that you set up.
Right, that makes sense. Those seem a bit more, well, actionable. So how can we use the FPM to boost our ability to do things?
One of the most powerful strategies is simplification. Make the tasks you want to do easier. Break them down into smaller, more manageable steps. So instead of, aiming to run a marathon, start with a walk around the block.
So instead of saying, I'm going to write a novel, I might say, I'm going to write for 15 minutes today.
Exactly. By making the task less daunting, you increase your ability to do it. Even on those days when motivation is low, you're removing the friction.
I like that, removing the fiction. And what about tools? Can they help us boost our ability?
Absolutely. Tools are like ability amplifiers. So think about using a meal planning app if you struggle with healthy eating, or a noise canceling app to help you focus while you work. The right tool can make a huge difference.
So it's about finding the tools that support the behaviors that we want to cultivate. What about the feeling of success? Does that play into the FBM at all?
Yeah, that's crucial. Fogg talks about the importance of celebrating small wins. So feeling successful, even with those small steps, that reinforces the behavior and makes it more likely that you'll keep going.
So don't wait until you achieve some huge goal to celebrate, acknowledge the progress you're making along the way.
Exactly. Every little victory builds momentum. Now let's talk about prompts. How can we use those strategically to kind of trigger those behaviors we want to make happen?
Okay, this is where we get to design our environment for success.
Right. You got it. Remember the three types of prompts we talked about: facilitators, sparks, and signals. Think about which type would be most effective for you, depending on your situation.
Okay, quick recap. Facilitators make things easier, sparks nudge us when motivation is low, and signals remind us when we're already good to go.
Precisely. Need to remember to take your vitamins every day. Put them next to your coffee maker so you see them first thing in the morning. That's a facilitator prompt. It makes the behavior easier.
So that little visual cue removes the friction of having to remember where you put the vitamins.
I love it. What about a spark prompt to get me motivated to exercise?
Maybe you try putting on your workout clothes as soon as you get up. Even if you don't plan to exercise until later, just that simple act can be enough to spark the behavior.
Interesting. I can see how that could work. It removes one extra barrier and makes it more likely that I'll actually follow through. What about signals? How could I use those effectively?
Signals are great for habits you're already pretty good at maintaining. Say you're pretty consistent with your morning meditation, but sometimes life gets in the way. Set a gentle alarm on your phone as a reminder.
It's like a little don't break the chain nudge.
Ah.
Okay, this is making me think about how I could redesign my whole routine. Exactly. By being intentional about the types of prompts you use, you can kind of set yourself up for success. But it's not just about individual behavior change, right? We saw in some of the research that the Fogg behavior model is being used to tackle some pretty big challenges out there.
Yeah, that's what really blew my mind. Using this model to get people to recycle more or
Yeah.
eat healthier, that's amazing. Can you tell us about some of the studies that you came across?
One study we looked at, they analyzed 24 tech interventions that were successful in helping people reduce unwanted behaviors. We're talking about things like smoking, unhealthy eating, even unsafe driving habits.
Wow, so they were using technology to help people change their behavior for the better. How did they do that?
The researchers, they found that these interventions tended to use one of two approaches. One they called the gray cue, which focused on using reminders and alerts at just the right time to kind of disrupt a negative behavior.
So it's like interrupting the pattern right in the moment and
Yeah.
prompting a different choice.
Exactly. The other approach was called the gray cycle. This one relied more on boosting motivation and providing personalized support to help people kind of change their behavior over time.
So gray cue is more about disrupting the behavior in the moment, and gray cycle is about building up motivation and support for long-term change. It seems like they both have their place.
That's what the researchers concluded. Both approaches were effective, but they kind of worked best in different contexts. The key takeaway is that persuasive technology, when designed thoughtfully, can be a really powerful tool for behavior change on a larger scale.
That's incredible. It feels like we're just starting to tap into the potential of the Fogg behavior model here. But before we get carried away with all the ways we can influence behavior, shouldn't we talk about ethics? Where do we draw the line?
That's a crucial question. Fogg himself, he emphasizes that this model should be used responsibly. It's not about manipulating people, it's about empowerment.
So it's about helping people achieve their own goals, not tricking them into doing things they don't actually want to do.
Exactly. The focus should always be on creating products and services that genuinely benefit people's lives.
That's a really important distinction. It's about using this knowledge to improve the world, not just to make a quick buck or exploit people's vulnerabilities.
Right. Ethical persuasive design is about creating a win-win situation where both the user and the creator benefit.
Okay, that makes me feel a lot better about all of this. It's like knowing the rules of the game means we can play it more strategically, but also more ethically.
Precisely. Now that we've kind of covered the individual and the societal applications, let's zoom out even further and talk about the bigger picture. Why does the Fogg behavior model matter in the grand scheme of things?
Okay, so we've covered how individuals can use the Fogg behavior model and how it's being used to tackle these big issues like health and sustainability.
Right, and how important it is to use this knowledge ethically, responsibly.
Exactly. But before we wrap up, I'm curious to get your take on the bigger picture. Like, why does the Fogg behavior model matter? What makes it so significant?
That's a great question. I think one of the most important things about this model is that it kind of demystifies human behavior. It gives us this framework for understanding, not just why we do what we do, but also why we sometimes don't do the things that we want to do.
Yeah, it's like we're getting a peek under the hood, seeing the mechanics of our own minds.
Exactly. And that understanding is incredibly empowering. It means we can start to take more control, design our environments for success and make more, well, conscious choices.
So instead of feeling at the mercy of our impulses and distractions, we can actually use this knowledge to kind of shape our behavior more intentionally.
Precisely. Another reason this model is so significant is that it highlights the power of design. Whether we're talking about a website, an app, or even our physical surroundings, the way things are designed can have this huge impact on our actions.
So it's not just about willpower, but about recognizing how our environment is constantly influencing us.
Right. And once we kind of understand the principles of persuasive design, we can make more informed choices about the products and services that we use. We can even advocate for designs that are more ethical and user-centered.
That's a really important point. We need to be savvy consumers, not just passive recipients of whatever's being thrown at us.
I agree. And finally, I think the Fogg behavior model offers a sense of hope. In a world that often feels really overwhelming, this model gives us a set of tools and strategies for making those positive changes, both in our own lives and the world around us.
It's like a roadmap for a better future.
Exactly. And that's something we can all get behind.
Absolutely. So as we wrap up this deep dive into the Fogg behavior model, what's one final thought you'd leave our listeners with? Something to ponder as they go about their day, navigating all these choices and behaviors.
Here's a challenge for everyone listening. Think about something you'd like to change in your life. A behavior you've been wanting to adopt, or maybe a habit you want to break. Could be anything,
Yeah.
big or small.
Like finally getting around to flossing regularly, or writing that book that's been brewing in the back of your mind.
Exactly. Now put on your Fogg behavior model glasses. Look at that behavior through the lens of motivation, ability, and prompts. What are your current levels of motivation and ability? What kind of prompts could you set up to trigger the behavior? How could you make the task easier, more rewarding?
It's like taking all the insights we've learned in this deep dive and applying them to our own lives.
Precisely. And remember, even small tweaks to your environment and your routine can make a big difference over time.
That's such an empowering thought. We're not just victims of circumstance. We have the power to shape our own behavior and our own futures.
Exactly. And that's what the Fogg behavior model is all about.
Well, on that note, we've reached the end of our deep dive. We hope you've enjoyed the journey.
Keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep